joining me here, a defining Batman artist of the 90s to me and many others, Mr. Kelley Jones. Kelley, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the Batman Book Club.
More than welcome. Thank you. I'm honored.
Well, I appreciate that. And I have a lot of questions for you, a lot of things I want to talk about, but I ask everyone when it's their first time on the show, what is your favorite Batman story?
My favorite Batman story, I would have to say, is the Englehart Rogers run in Detective, which is, to me, the defining, definitive, perfect Batman. And
Nice.
if I were an editor of Batman, I wouldn't say anyone has to live up to something or copy it or anything. I'd say that's the atmosphere and the tone that you want to keep no matter how you do it. I think it's one of the most amazing, just in comics in general. I think it's one of the most amazing stories runs ever, and it defined all those characters. And if you were not, I always measure things by if you weren't a fan of something, if you weren't a fan of comics or the character, whatever, if you read that, you would be just as impressed as someone who loved it. It's that good. It's one of those little miracles that happen every so often, where the right person writes it, the right person draws it, the right character at the right time. It just all came together, and none of it was intended. It's hard to make something special. But I remember friends of mine at the comic shop I was going to, I was just a kid, and they knew I was not really reading that stuff, said, you have to give this a shot. And that's the best thing someone can say, is it transformed them. It took them from not being a fan or not having it on their radar to saying, I'm now a fan of this. And it made me buy up all the Batmans and get into it and understand it. But to this day, I can go back and read it for pleasure,
Yeah. Wow. So that was kind of your gateway then.
Yeah, it was.
Into Batman. Perfect. I mean, that was the story I was going to get to, is ask you kind of your origin with Batman.
Well,
but there you go.
I had the good fortune of meeting Marshall Rogers at the time, about a year after those came out. And I never used to do that, but I made a point to go. I think he and John Byrne were the guys that I made a point to go see as a kid, because their work made me like stuff that I hadn't liked or wasn't really interested in, or it wasn't on my radar. Like I said, I was reading all different kinds of stuff, but Rogers' work is still, to me, the definitive Batman in my head. It's the one I see.
Yeah, I've mentioned that a lot on this in this show, of my love for, now called, the Strange Apparitions.
Yeah,
it's just,
they didn't have a title for it then. It was just, Steve Englehart wrote the scripts in advance. He had no idea Marshall Rogers was going to draw them. Marshall was assigned it because he had done some cool little backups and people dug it. And he interpreted those scripts brilliantly. I don't think Steve Englehart saw them until he got back from Europe. They were drawn and produced and on the stands and out, and made a huge splash, and he didn't know it until he came back. And so he didn't even know Rogers was going to be on it. It's just one of those flukes that happen.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, it's crazy. And I would almost a friendly argument of, has there been any team that's had more of an impact with such a small amount of story? It's 6 regular issues.
No,
and
I
it is defining,
because it influenced the films that subsequently came later on, and it changed how everyone did the Joker. I think it's still the most disturbing Joker I've ever read. And he doesn't do all the stuff that later on, which is kind of over the top to me, but his stuff was, this guy just had his view of the world the way it was, and he needed the Batman in it. This was all brand new stuff. I mean, what his goals were made no sense, but they did to the Joker. And I think there's some of the funniest but most frightening at the same time things happening And that's a hard thing to do as a writer. Much harder too for the artist to get that across. It all just came together. I always tell people when they read it, it could have came out right today. If it was coming out today, it would be huge, just like it was then.
What are we, almost like 45 years later? And I think it still feels so fresh.
Yeah,
still feels so fresh.
Yeah, I if, like I said, I would just make it, if I was running DC, it would just be something I'd put out once a year. We just keep it in print, because you want people to always see your best stuff. And as a company, that was a real high watermark. And that's not to say, I loved, obviously I loved O'Neill and Adams stuff when I came to that. There's always individual stories here and there. I dug those quite a bit. And they were every bit as important. It's just, I think, as something that is crystallized or distilled or whatever you want to say, it was those. They were deadly serious with a sense of humor, but the humor was within the action. And it wasn't made for laughs. It was like grim, but it was there, It had so many firsts in it that that for me just knocked me out. I mean, and the depiction of Batman was perfect, dead on. There's a little thing, if people go and look at it, Marshall would draw Batman a certain height, but when he would draw him as Batman, he added one head higher to it. It was a subtle thing, right? It was just this subtle thing that he was more impressive. But it's a great touch. I mean, it's one of those things that you subliminally notice it, and it's once he told me that, I went, that's thinking. That's really good thinking.
That's awesome. That's your favorite story, and you got to meet the artists of that run. That's great. You said that it kind of the impact it had, in some firsts on the art. Well, I think that many could say that that's a similar impact that your art had on them, especially for Batman and the world of Gotham and his villains.
And I appreciate that, because when I came to Batman, I didn't know I was going to get Batman. So I was doing my own thing. And when it came to me, I felt that if I was to do something with the character, I had to bring something of myself, because I had been doing that with Sandman, I've been doing that with Deadman, and I didn't want to just ape a style or follow a kind of a same tone. And so what I wanted to bring was a very film noir and Gothic feeling to it. I didn't know how to do that. I mean, I knew what I wanted. I could say it verbally, but visually, I didn't know how to do that. So I think for me, it was, I always fall back on, well, if I invented the character, how would I do it if I was inventing it? And I try not to overthink it. I don't go into it thinking, well, what if I was Batman? I always think of it, what if Batman was like in the alley, or what if he was after me, or what would get to me? Because his whole thing was fear. And what just came to me was that cape and cowl. I mean, that it's there already, but I made that the centerpiece. It wasn't everything else. And then when you have that idea, it spawns other ones. And that's why I would make the utility belt really be a utility belt with just all kinds of odds and ends. But that's the fun of comics. There's an eccentricity in comics, and Batman of all comics lets you be more eccentric. You can do more of those things. I decided as well to make the city I didn't want New York with the lights off. I wanted it to be its own city. And I wanted it to be an anachronistic city as well as an advanced city. So you'd have all the modern stuff, but you'd also have steam trains and hook and ladder phones next to state-of-the-art computers. It's just an odd place, and an odd place that makes these people. It isn't Batman creates it, or they, it's not. It's Gotham itself is a weird place, and I got that just from when I would travel to different cities, cities have different vibes, and I just didn't want it relatable to New York or anything like that. I wanted it to be its own thing. And what I enjoy about comics, especially if you're going to do something like Batman or any run, is you come up with that primary idea of what you want to say with it, and let that create more ideas. Because I would have had, in no way would I have been able to explain that to Denny O'Neil when he hired me, that I was going to do all these things. I didn't know. I just knew they wanted me to do the book, and okay. And within no time, this whole thing just sort of spread like a disease, as it were. and it's fun. I mean, the ideas would just be all over the place. And those ideas in staying with that idea of a film noir Gothic atmosphere, I thought I had a better chance of just competing, because at the time, Image Comics were very big, and they had a certain style, and there was a lot of just visually things had a very different style in comics then, and I had thought, well, that's not going to serve me. That kind of thing isn't going to serve me. So I'll just go with what I like. I kept it just with, I decided to, if I was going to do this, try to stay in the time that influenced me, and stay in that time. And as far as comics go, and that really helped. And so I've always felt like, when I look at those now, I don't do it very often, but when I do, it's not a thing where you go, okay, I'm not embarrassed. A lot of times you look, oh God, what did I do? But they have their own timelessness to that kind of personal or sincere way to do it. I was making a point not to be influenced by the times I was in, or the artistic movements that were going on. I decided just to do Batman as something where I felt people could come and it would be a quieter book. They weren't connected to others. There wasn't huge things going on. They were just very intimate, pure Batman stories. It's the only way I really knew how to do it, because if you think too much, you'll ruin it.
Yeah.
And so I just kept it small. And it worked.
Was Red Rain, was that the what do you want to say, the starting point on Batman for you then?
Yeah, well, Red Rain was, I had just finished a storyline with Sandman, and they'd asked me, would you like to continue as the regular artist on Sandman? At that point, or would you like to take a shot at doing this, something with Batman at that point? And whereas I had a good time with Sandman, that was like being called up to play for the Yankees or something, because and I never thought anyone would call me about something like that. I think I was fairly shocked. I understood monster books or horror books or stuff like that. That I got, but they saw what I was doing with Deadman and Sandman. They mentioned a Swamp Thing I'd done, and they really liked that I would take it and do kind of unique versions of this stuff. So they were very experimental then. They were, you had a lot of different guys doing things there with the characters. So they just said, yeah, why would you, give it a shot? They were careful. They put it in an Elseworld, which was a new thing then, so people wouldn't go bonkers. But it did really, really well. And so not much longer after that, that's when they asked me to start doing covers for Batman. I never really knew what was going on in those books. They would give a shorthand, but they liked the Batman they were seeing. And I think it helped that I didn't know, because I was just doing this Batman the way he appealed to me. It's very hard to go out and do this with the idea, well, I'm going to make something everybody likes. I don't know how to do that. And I applaud anyone who does. I have no idea how to read an audience. I just do it thinking, well, there's got to be a handful of people like me, and maybe they'll like it. And then I go from there. And I've always done it with the idea that it's the last thing they'll let me do, and they're gonna, you know. Uh, but there's a freedom in that, and in that freedom, and in that freedom, the ideas blossom, and that's where this version of Batman came from. I knew I'd kind of hit on something after a while, because I would have a lot of other artists and other comic book creators tell me how much they enjoy it, even to this day. Like, it was, but when you're that close to it, you don't know how different you are. And I would recommend that to anyone creatively or anything in life. When you stay true to something or sincere to whatever it is, you have a better chance of it connecting. And I wanted a very definitive Batman in my head, what it was that made him interesting and cool and worthy of someone plunking down their money to follow it. And maybe holding on to them and read them later on and go, hey, this is, one of the things they would keep. You stay in that because that's all you have. I didn't think sales, or I didn't think anything like that. Because I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do that. I am as shocked as anyone when something does that well, because I'm not thinking on those terms. I don't know how to do that. But I do know that I don't want to be bored. And so when I'm working every day, I know if I'm bored, everyone else is going to be bored. I'd rather do it where I'm not bored and happy that day and someone really disliking it, than I made someone happy, but I was in mental prison while doing it.
Sure.
There's got to be that excitement to it,
So, I mean, I guess as far as Red Rain would come then, so I assume that like the script was probably done and it was thinking whose art would go with this.
What had happened is Doug Minch, who wrote it, had an idea for this very gothic story of Batman, though it was horror. But, in a gothic story, even though the goals are accomplished, the good wins in the end, as it is, everybody can die in it. It can be very, very bleak that way. And he had seen what I'd done on Deadman. He'd seen what I'd done on Sandman. And he thought, hey, I think this guy might be the one. So he called me up and he said, I have this idea. Would you be interested? And, at that point, just the simple, and he had, at that time, Doug was very close to Denny O'Neil, and Denny had just said, if you give me a script, I'll approve it. So he said, it's a gig. All I have to do is turn it in. I'll send it to you. You read it over. I read it and I loved it. The story was there, but there was a lot left open for me to interpret, very organic. So it wouldn't say how Batman would look. It would just say he's hungry, he's this way. Or it wouldn't say how they're doing something. He would describe the violence in a certain way, or the atmosphere in a certain way. So it left it pretty open to interpretation, though the script was brilliantly executed. So they approved it. I don't really think even DC knew what it was going to be. I know I certainly didn't. Doug may have, but I didn't. It kind of grew in the telling as I went. And I thought that would be it. I thought that would be the only time I would do anything with Batman, because it was so different. And it was a story that had a beginning, middle, and end. It was done. And they were having great success anyway on Batman. Why would they, so I was just happy to tag along and get a piece of it, and then be able to one day tell friends and family and kids, hey, I did a Batman one time. Look, that was it. And because I figured I'd go right back to the more bizarre and horrific things and whatever. And it probably, as with Rogers and Englehart, I was at the right place at the right time. And I had struck a chord, and I didn't look like anybody else, and I wasn't like anyone else. And good or bad, they can, that's a you kind of strive for that in anything creative, just to kind of be your own guy. And because probably it didn't hurt that I was, I lived on the West Coast, and without computers and social stuff, I didn't know anything that was going on. I just, I lived in a semi-rural area, and I just did my thing. No one I knew really was into comics. So it was just something I would do, turn it in, and then go, live life. And so I didn't really know the reaction to these things till well after they had come out. They would tell me, they would say something, but I didn't know what the general impact was until they would say, hey, come here, sign here, do something like that. And then I would be overwhelmed. It was, that first 15 minutes, it's okay. After that, you're like, oh my God, now there's pressure on me. This stuff I wasn't thinking of is now I got to think about it like this. It's like those old movie or old shows or whatever, you're okay when you're just talking, when they said the red light's on now, 10 million people are watching, you freeze, and that's what I had to, so I went back to my little semi-rural house and kind of detoxed after that first reaction. They were telling me that. I don't want to say I was ignorant of it. They were telling me, hey, this is doing very well. But that doesn't mean, that's just the people I always talk to. And, you do an interview here or there in a publication, but those are small. And like I said, 99% of my friends never read, they were all real world people,
Sure. Yeah.
It's like, I did this thing and that was that. So I think all those things impacted the value of what I did, because I was completely ignorant as to everything else.
That's great, because I think that I can only imagine that it would also help and benefit you too. If, like you'd said, you were just kind of doing what you imagine Batman to be, and that's all you've been doing. And then they tell you that's working. So you're just like, okay, I'm going to keep doing Batman as I see Batman, as I believe Batman should be.
Well, I had the good fortune of Denny O'Neil being an editor, who being one of the premier people involved in this character. Yeah. So when he would look at it, I would trust him with his opinion. As with Doug Mensch, they would just say, hey, this is fine. I didn't really ask, but because you're always afraid if you ask, they'll say no, or they'll say, well, we've been meaning to talk to you. It opens the door to something.
The old saying, ask for forgiveness and not permission. So
right. And so I had learned to not ask for permission. But then in my own odd way of thinking, I thought, well, that's what they're going to want. They're going to want, if they just want the same thing, there's plenty of guys who can do that. If they're asking me, then I'd rather fail being me than trying to be somebody else, or trying to make someone happy. So I'd work on making myself happy. And since I didn't get any real feedback, and since I didn't really hear anything, it had its own little organic, personal touch. It's probably why that run. I heard a lot of nice things from artists at the time, and I really hear it now from the next generation of artists who grew up with it, as it was very liberating to them or whatever. That is touching, because they're not talking about my technical abilities. They're talking about the emotion of it. And any art you receive it emotionally, it should be created with emotion and received with emotion, not technical stuff, not how realistic did you make his boots or something like that. It should be how did it strike you when you got to it. And I was lucky because Doug wrote those kind of stories, and so I just, I went to town on it. I enjoyed that period because there was so much freedom to it. And like I said, my biggest fear is boredom, and I was never bored doing that, even though it's a lot of work to do a monthly. And I always recommend to artists, try to do more than 3 or 4 issues a year. Try to do 12. Try to get on a book, and that's where your style will develop. That's where your personal, artistic, whatever that is, will come out. It won't come out by just drawing something and taking months and months and months to do an issue. You have to put yourself between the hammer and the anvil and get it out. And then things happen. The little miracles will happen.
Well, the fact you and I are sitting here and talking because I just tweeted out, I think, to you, because I did a picture of that run from the 90s, these collections, and you responded to it, and much appreciated, because I think I'm definitely not alone. And I think the Doug Moench, Kelley Jones run of Batman in the 90s was one of the defining teams of that book in that decade, the decade before, the decade after.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear about that run with Doug Moench.
I think that as I said earlier, you can't go into something saying we're going to do something special. What you can do, though, is say I'm going to go into something, give it my all. Mm-hmm. And so I was riffing off Doug, and Doug was riffing off me. So we were just going back and forth, and it was really between us. And what would happen is he would look at what I was doing, and it would make him feel he could be more personal in his writing, and vice versa. So it just kept getting more and more like my whole audience was basically just the team on the book. It would be Doug, John, Greg, and Todd, and it would just be us. And I wasn't really thinking of everybody else. I know it is because the books come out, but I wouldn't really, while doing the book, that was my focus. I would look at a printed copy when it came out just to check and see if some of the tricks work, and then go on to the next. And I didn't really think of it more than that. But that, I think, I mean, I'm not going to be naive here. I thought about a year and a half into it, I thought, okay, we're on, this is looking or feeling good. Like I got a real grasp of this thing. And it was very natural. And I'll be honest, Denny O'Neil used to call me every so often, and he would say, look, I know you don't hear from me that much, but that's because I don't really need to tell you anything. So I don't want you to think I'm ignoring you. I don't want you to think I don't. He says, I'm just going to say I think something special is going on, but I don't want to muck with it. So, but every 6 weeks or so, he'd get a call. Just a lot of times it's just, how are you doing? And what's going on? And he would tell me stuff, and that would be that. And because he didn't want to stir the pot too much and affect it. Probably because he had been through that in his time with Adams. He was just doing his thing. And at that point, I was enjoying that Doug was writing like 1-part or 2-part stories, nothing huge, no great soul-shattering emotion. It was just pure Batman, like what it would be. And his interpretation of Batman was, he's not crazy, he's not, he's just a very determined one track, like a human cat. There's something and I have to get it. And that was how I saw him. I didn't see him as this conflicted person or the multiple personalities or that kind of stuff. It was like, this is what he does, and he does it better than anyone. And he only does it at night, and he plays up the fear, and everything is towards intimidation. I remember Doug saying all the time, draw him intimidating. Never think that he relaxes for a moment when he's in the uniform. And I thought that's brilliant.
So that was the main part of discussion with you too, was him. He wasn't painting the picture for you. It was emotion.
He was. What's the emotion here? He was, I mean, he would say to me, well, what villains do you want to do? What would you like to do that way? I would always tell him what I tell any writer: don't write to what you think my strengths are. Write what you want to write, and I'll figure it out. Even if it's something is not my wheelhouse, I'll figure it out. That's the only way I'll get better, and it's my job. But I would tell him characters. I would give him general things like the only at night thing was something I think I said. I don't want him in space, and I don't want him avoid Robin as much as you can, because I saw him as a loner. I was very big on that kind of grit of the city. I told him once, I said, the city is what makes these people. It isn't the people. It's the city does it. So give me locales, or give me the chance to kind of show that off, that it's this weird city. And whatever the reason is, I said, Gotham's been this way when it was just a little trading village, you know, and there was some Dutch farmers. It was weird then, you know. So it's just a weird place. So I said, that's how I'm going to do it. And I remember Denny once called and says, you have a steam train right in the middle of, you know, this whole, and I said, doesn't it seem like there'd be a steam train there? And he says, you know, I was going to call to tell you to change it to electric, but he agreed. He said, no, I think you're right. I said, and also for people reading it, it stops them for a minute to kind of look at the environment and not just see it as wallpaper in the background. There's stuff going on, you know, that's different. And that adds to the atmosphere of this character. It just makes it fun. And comics, at their very soul, are one part eccentric, one part fun. And however the story turns out, good, bad, indifferent, that's what it has to be to make us different from films and television and everything else. Is the eccentricity has to come from your creators, and the fun has to be that whatever the journey was a blast. And a blast can be, why is there a steam train here? If someone says there shouldn't be a steam train here, and I don't know how his boots lace, you don't need to read this. You know, you don't need to, you're not, you know, you're missing the point. And you can get that from the other stuff. Here, it's just the joy of this eccentric thing we still do. You're all by yourself when you're reading it. It's quiet. There's no sound. You have to do all this stuff in your head. Take advantage of it. I mean, rather than see it as a limitation, you take advantage of it. And that's all I was trying to do. I mean, it made for longer days, but it made it much more interesting.
I've always found your stuff is very atmospheric, and definitely would make me, and not just because it says right on your shirt right now, but the Universal monsters. And German expressionism film, and especially in your alleys, which I know is such a weird thing to point out, like such a specific detail, but like your alleys felt very much that way. And I just thought, I think that, I mean, mission accomplished, obviously, all these years later. But what you were hoping readers to get out of it, it's just kind of, I feel like I'm definitely not alone in that, of you're just immersed in this world because of the atmosphere that you're building.
Well, that's all intentional. Everything like that, what you said, was intentional. And it was done with the idea that Gotham is character. So I couldn't skimp on that. And Gotham being a character has to have, the alley should be symbolic of all of the undercurrent, the underbelly of this place. Not all of it's bad, but all of it is a little crazy. The city was born crazy, and it's a little crazy. It doesn't mean evil. That's two different things. It just means a little crazy. And crazy can be good, but if allowed to be taken to a more anarchic side, you get the Joker, you get the Penguin. Batman was, you know, people always used to say to me, well, he's not successful because these guys still do what they do and whatever. And I said, no, he's extremely successful. That's why they're crazy, is they keep opposing him. The definition of crazy is you keep doing the same thing and you fail. And that's what they're doing. I said, regular people, they don't commit a crime. I mean, they're done. Once he says stop it, drags them off. Regular folks, they change their lives. That's how I always saw it. And it's why they would tolerate him. Law enforcement would tolerate him and let you break all of your constitutional rights, right? So he would tell regular thieves and burglars and rapists and murderers, regular ones, never again, don't ever do this again. And you would never do it again. Even if you had to go to jail, you'd straighten your life and whatever. The crazy guys, the Scarecrows and the Penguins and all the rest of them, they'll just keep doing it again. That's why they're nuts. And the optimism of Batman, he's not this grim thing, is maybe they will change. That's why he does what he does. Maybe they will change. He doesn't hate them. How can you hate them? But crime he hates, but these people are insane.
Mm-hmm.
And I just saw that as actually an optimistic point with him.
Yeah. I
That
like that.
yeah, that he feels that their life has value because he had lives taken from him. He can't do that. And you don't know what will happen. And you don't know what that person will be. Who knows? I mean, it's impossible to think, but I always used to think when I was talking to Doug, I said, we should do there should be this one story maybe where for a moment you can kind of see what the Joker would have been if he wasn't this way. What positives would he have done in the world? Like if he, Joker gets hit in the head for whatever, and for an issue he does good until his, he comes back. Yeah. It's like his amnesia is he does good. And we never got, that was to be in our 4th year. I was going to put forward just a one issue of he gets knocked in the head and he's amazing. He's just this lucid, insightful, like Sherlock Holmes on steroids. He can just can diagnose something, or he can figure something out, and he's doing real good in the world, and then the bad stuff comes back.
Did you ever relay that idea to anybody?
It's touched on lightly when I did Kings of Fear, which was a few years ago, where we did a thing of what would Gotham be like, and I told the writer then, Scott Peterson, that I told him this thing, and so he put in like just a page here or there of what would they be like if they weren't crazy. And but that was one of the things that we did the first 3 years, and then the last year I wanted to do some of these kind of more bizarre stories. Doug and I had created this character, and if you read the 3-year run, you'll see this odd little character in the background, the marionettes. He's doing this little marionette thing, puppet thing. And that character was to dominate our finale year. But in that, I was going to have these, I had a few of these odd little stories that I thought would really work. And it was these kind of sad. It was sad to me to see what the Joker could have been. But it would also justify, because I was tired of the criticism that Batman's a failure because he doesn't just kill him or do whatever, which is meaning he gives up on being Batman. He gives up on that philosophy. So that was kind of the thing, was these kind of optimistic stories, kind of sad stories, which still kept the flavor and the tone of Batman.
I ask because it reminds me a little bit of a Legends of the Dark Knight story called Going Sane, where Joker thinks that Batman has been killed and he's dead. So the Joker then feels like he's lost purpose of being Joker. Yeah. And so he does go sane. It just really made me trigger that. I'm like, did you ever share this idea? Because I'm seeing a little bit of similarities, but the rest of it, not so much.
With my thing, it was, like I said, he's hit in the head, and it's like an amnesia.
Yeah.
So, but his mind is still so high functioning at all levels. He's the ultimate multitasker, right? Mm-hmm. So he's doing all these things, and it's all positive. And it's not that Batman makes him this way. Batman's in opposition to him. And that's interesting. That's to the Joker, it's interesting. It's something to do because he's very much like Sherlock Holmes. When there was no case, he would go take cocaine. Mm-hmm. The Joker's biggest fear is there wouldn't be a Batman, or he's meaningless without that. All of those things are just sadistic. They're meaningless. Mm-hmm. And that's where that came from. I mean, that was one of the things we wanted to do. And but at that point, I think the powers that be, it wasn't, publishing was, we want to tie all the books together, and there would have been no way to tell the stories we want to do coherently then. Mm-hmm. So I was afraid that I would just then not do my best stuff, or I would not have that same wind in my sails. And that's when I left at that point. It was nothing animatus. It was, I mean, sales wise, they were right. If you tie all the books together, you're going to make more money. So, and that's why the books weren't reprinted for a long time, because they weren't tied to anything. They were amongst the most, I think they had told me for years, they were in the top 5 requested to be reprinted that DC would get. And eventually they did.
Mm-hmm.
And
were you given a heads up on the reprints?
Yeah, they got a hold
collection?
of me. Yeah, they got a hold of me and they said, we're going to do it in 2 volumes. And the orders were tremendous for a hardcover. They had for hardcover, that was a reprint of a run that they had not seen numbers like that. And then it sold out as fast as it did.
Yeah.
And that's because they hadn't been reprinted. And that's because they were very eccentric. Those stories to this day, I would say that when people get to it, they're just as bizarre as they probably were when they first came out, because you're used to this certain thing. And but I always tell people, if they give it a chance, they're going to see a very definitive Batman. It's like probably its closest relatives are the 40s of what that character was then. That especially the early years where it's, pretty eccentric book then. And so that's where its roots really are. That's its fathers and mothers are those early issues.
I was trying to find an example of the next thing I was going to point, and I got to your steam engine.
Yeah.
Going through Gotham.
Yeah.
What I really loved that I think was also really unique is at the end of each issue and your tease for what's next.
Yeah.
And it's its own, like, what do you want to say? It's its own panel, just teasing. And I love that. Like, I know I'm asking almost 30 years later was that just your idea of, we know where we're going next? Let's do this.
I felt I wanted to decorate Batman. If you notice in a lot of issues, there's chapter breaks, right? Chapter 1, this, chapter 2, that. That got to be difficult because then I would have to read. I was determining where those chapters were. Doug wasn't. And so Doug didn't know I was really going to, I just decorate. So I would do a little opening panel and then I would do these little chapter breaks. And then Doug finally says, hey, don't do the chapter breaks because you're going to get those wrong. Let me figure it. So he started getting involved and I said, okay, that helps, So he started telling me, okay, he would break it down to where the chapters were. And then I would have to, I would read the script and think of what symbolic little panel could I put there for chapter 2, blah, 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 chapter 3, whatever. And I always had felt that kind of decoration to a book made it more intimate and made it more special. And it made the fans and the readers become more connected to that the way I was. I don't know, but that's how it worked for me. And I thought it was charming, just a charming little extra. When you did next issue, this is coming. When I was a kid reading comics, I loved next issue, this is coming, And I remember Wrightson did it in Swamp Thing so well. Like, there'd be a little thing for what's coming next. And then you'd spend that period of time waiting, wondering, because that thing, you had the satisfaction of the story and then whetted your appetite for the next piece. But it's just delight. It's just the charm and the eccentricity of comics, It's that fourth wall, you break it down a little bit.
Yeah.
The tough part was
great word. Charming.
The tough part was coming up with something new all the time. That wasn't just repeating what you did, but that's the fun of it.
Yeah. Well, that's perfect for I was going to ask you if it was, and if so, how challenging was it to not only do a monthly book, but also do the cover?
I have to say that it was, physically, yes, it can be tough, but it's the only way you get good at comics. I'm not saying as an artist, but there's really great illustrators who do comics, but it's not comics to me because you have to go through this really tough 12 issues a year is tough. And I think I wanted to be a really good comic book artist first. Then I could do the illustration stuff if I have to, and I can do that. But something inside yourself grows when it's in that position. The ideas come, the confidence comes when you have to do 22 pages in a cover a month. and you don't get a break. You go right on to the next. And if you want a break, you better keep your deadline so you can have a few days in between of nothing. But usually I spent that time getting my reference because, Doug would tell me and I'd go to the bookstores and I'd find what I needed. But my style developed then, and my more importantly, my ways of thinking started then. I could read Doug's scripts during that period and visualize it all. And so when I got to the actual drawing of the page, I didn't have to layouts and I have to do all this other crap. I could see it because I've been focusing so much on making my deadlines. Your mind just instantly goes to work. And I would read the script, and while reading it, these things would happen. I might write a few notes, but I wouldn't draw anything because I want all my energy to be, I don't want to be bored while I'm doing it. So all of my energy would be design on the page, do everything. You save a lot of time that way, but and I will say the first 4 or 5 months were tough.
Okay.
Because you can't be late and you can't eat the time of your inker and your letterer and your colorist. You have to be done in the time they give you so they get the time they need to make a really good product. But that kind of mental exercise, that kind of discipline, and that discipline can be more than I physically have to do it. It's you have to tell your friends, no, I can't go bowling. Tell your girlfriend, can't go to the movies. You have to, on a couple of occasions, I had to miss or cut short holiday things because I had to make these dates. You're not doing it for yourself. You're not even doing it for the editor, but the people. I had a lot of friends who worked at comic book stores. And so I knew what it was like when a book was late then, or it didn't come in on time or whatever, and what it meant financially and what it also meant to the readership. So I had these friends who worked at comic book stores. So I knew that end of it. I would be aware of it. And I just felt I can't fail because I'm tired today, or I can't fail because I can't. So for that 3 years, that's what I did. I was a comic book artist, and I can still do that. I can go right into that. I don't really need an editor to tell me to keep on me to get something in, but I always ask them, when do you need it? And then I do it. It's ingrained in me now. But if you can do those things, you're given a lot more freedom. Danny O'Neill would say, well, you're in every month, go to town. If you want to add these things, if you want to do this stuff, because I did do a very, very different Batman. And people say, well, did you go in there and were arrogant? Or no, I was on time and Denny rewarded me with freedom. That's how you do it.
I'm trying to think now, as far as concerning Batman, have you done pretty much all the covers of the stories that you did the interior artwork?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought so too, unless there was something that I was missing.
I think somebody had told me I've probably done more Batman covers than anyone else.
I'd believe it.
I don't know. I didn't keep track of it. I would be shocked if that were true, but they had told me they'd counted them up. And probably, there was about 10 years where it seems like I did. I mean, and then whenever I would do Batman subsequently and other things, I've done 3 or 4 miniseries with him, and I've done all those too. So I guess it's a lot of covers. I don't really think of it in. Sure. Somebody can count them up and tell me if that's right or wrong. But
well, I mean, just off the top of my head, the Gotham After Midnight was 12. Kings of Fear was 6. Unseen was 6. So Haunted Gotham was 4. This run, I don't know how many issues were in these. It's adding up fast.
There's 36, then All Nightfall and Night Quest, and that's probably another 20 or 30. I don't know. It's a lot of covers. I can remember in those days, you weren't given like now where they'll hire someone just to do covers and they'll have a long time. We were given day and a half, maybe.
Wow.
They would tell you what it was In my case, I was kind of lucky because they didn't really tell me what it was early on. And then when I was doing the books, I didn't really go through, I used to just turn them in finished to save time. I didn't go through an approval process. But since I was, they would say, for example, they would say the cover, Kelley, the cover's due on Thursday, and they would tell me that Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning. So you had to just sit down and draw a picture and do it and get it into the FedEx box and ship it off.
Is that a case of first idea? You run with the first idea?
Yeah, you do. And that's another thing that's good about being in the real treadmill of the monthly grind is you focus your head pretty good. And that in and of itself makes better pictures.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people say, "Well, aren't you rushed? Aren't you this?" You go, no, you have fear of missing that deadline. So you have to be good. It has to be interesting, and you have to be on time. I think a lot of times, I'm not crazy if someone comes in and says something like, and I've been able to do it a few times, but if they come in and say this enormous amount of work in this short amount of time, and I'll do what I can, but a lot of times I couldn't. But with Batman, it was something where I knew where to shortcut. And one of the shortcuts I wasn't going to take was on my art. So I would take it on waiting that somebody would get back to me and say, this is okay or not. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't give a lot of, I would go straight to, for example, I didn't go through approvals, but I would send the stuff Xerox to them, the original stuff to the inker, John Beatty, without waiting for it to go in this big thing. So he would get it directly and just go to town. I would send the copies would go to Todd Klein so he could letter if he had to in advance. But a lot of times we'd do it fast like that. Sometimes I'd send it directly to Todd. Wouldn't go through the office, but that would save time. And they began to appreciate that. At first it spooked them, obviously would. But what happened was Doug was a big advocate of that. And we were picking up time. Monthlies, you lose time. I was picking up time, yet I was doing an enormous amount of detail. And I was doing an enormous amount of complicated layouts. And that cape was harder to do than if I was drawing him physically, just showing his physicality all the time. That took a lot of time to do, and it took a lot of time to ink on John's behalf. So, but it was different, and I could tell the results were there, and all of these things served the end result. It was, the ends did justify the means, and God bless the fact that I was around other people in charge who had written and drawn books who said, yeah, we get it. If they hadn't done that, there's no way to explain it to someone who's not been through that. Yeah. And there's a lot of editors who don't do that. They have never done it before. So if you're working with Denny O'Neil would get it. Archie Goodwin got it. Doug Minch, they all understood, okay, that works. And so anywhere I could save time, I would. So I could come up with chapter breaks and intro panels and exit panels and all that extra goodies. I tried to give readers, in my head, their money's worth, but also a reason to be proud to be a Batman fan, that they were getting something unique. That's all you can do.
Do you have, for whatever reason, emotionally, as a fan, just on the looks alone, do you have a cover of yours that stands out amongst the others?
There was one I remember being pretty proud of, where they did not know, they needed it, and they said, look, if you can't, we understand, but we got to have one by tomorrow morning. They gave me maybe 4 or 5 hours. Wow. There was a snafu at the office. That happens, and it's no one's fault. And they said, we need one. It was for one of the Nightfall covers, and all they said was, Batman, we think he's in a sewer, but we need it for solicitation. We need it for this. We've got a run going. And I said, he's in a sewer. Okay. So I drew Batman drowning with rats on his head. And it was like, I can remember just putting the forms down and having enough to go by, and then taking the chance to ink a lot of stuff there that hadn't been drawn. Because whereas they say I had 5 hours, I really had less than that, because I had to then box it and drive it to the FedEx people. And I knew that if traffic's bad, I got to allow for traffic. So my time window got smaller and smaller. But it turned out to be, when it was said and done, a terrific cover. And it's one of my personal favorites, just even without all these hair-raising circumstances. That one stood out to me quite a bit, just because at that point I remember thinking, God, I'm kind of a comic book artist. I'm kind of, I can do this.
Started to settle in a little bit.
I would always read these stories, these guys having to brew coffee and work all night and create masterpieces. Jim Steranko and Jack Kirby and all these guys, and John Byrne, for Christ's sakes. And I can't touch, the hem of their garb, because those guys just were geniuses. So, but when I was put in those situations, I kind of enjoyed it, because I knew a lot of guys wouldn't do it. A lot of guys would shrink back from it. I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of them would. And I would take that as a challenge to see if I could do something really great, or something really, really terrific, and make all of these hurdles. And sometimes, I see all the flaws all the time, but that was one where I saw it, I went, okay. And there's a bunch of the covers actually I did enjoy. At the time, you don't really think of it that way. You're just thinking, do you hit the storytelling marks? Do you hit the stuff they want in it? And is it satisfying just at that moment? It's the run itself, I didn't really look at for about 10 years, 11 years after. And then I did. And I have to say that when you're not given a chance to worry about something like we were then, just get it done. It came out pretty damn good. I can say that now. At the time, I wouldn't have. At the time, you just see all the mistakes or the missed opportunities, or if I only had this or if that. But all of that washes away to where you can just look at it. And, I had an editor at DC tell me recently, it was the last, they had said that was the last long run by any artist. It was 3 years, and I've been doing all these covers, and it was so eccentric. They're not saying good or bad. They're just saying that kind of comic book way of doing it, because it did evolve out of that, to where there would be 6 issue arcs or 4-issue arcs, that kind of thing, and they would switch up the artists and stuff like that. But at the time we were doing it, it was Doug's baby. What he wanted to do, and Denny ran interference, and it was their thing. It's a terrific situation to be in.
For me, for no other reason other than just to tell you, the 2 covers that stand out to me the most, the one for 516 made the cover of the hardcover. I love that. And then it was great because I think you even posted it on social media recently. 524 Scarecrow.
The Scarecrow.
I love that Scarecrow. That cover. I love those 2 issues. I think the opening panel of the first, how fun was that to draw a Scarecrow, like Jonathan Crane's Scarecrow on?
Well,
is Scarecrow in a field.
The influence of the Scarecrow was from the Wizard of Oz. And if you remember, Ray Bolger plays him like all loosey-goosey, because he has no physical muscles and stuff. He's straw in it. And that had always struck me of what an interesting way to do him, that he is, that you can do Jonathan Crane that way. And then he started, to me, he had like this sort of a skullish face, a horrific face, because he was there to terrify, right? The fear gas. I loved everything. The Scarecrow is one of those great villains to me, because he has so much you can do with him that way. And then the other cover you're talking about was I had been doing it for a long time, and I wanted to let people know there's a new sheriff in town. And so I did a very symbolic thing of Batman. He's on the skulls, which is to say this is going to be a scarier Batman, more noirish, more gothic. He had the magnifying glass, bringing back to actually doing detective work, because he was based on Sherlock Holmes. He was not in this big heroic pose, but in one that's like he's going to pounce. So there was all these things saying, not just am I drawing it, but this is the tone of that book. And that was not anything it's nothing you say, hey, DC, I'm going to do this. I didn't do that. I just thought, well, I'm going to let everyone know visually. There's a book, and you got to remember the title was coming off this massive all connected thing, and they finally finished telling these two huge story arcs, and I think they were all exhausted. So when I came along, they were like, oh, good, all we have to do is Doug tell us what the story's about, and Kelley draws it, and there's no more coordinating it with everybody else, and did they get these elements right? Did it all connect? It's like a big Lego. They didn't have to do that anymore. So they would give me that kind of a breather,
Speaking of that, so that was actually my introduction to your work, was receiving the first volume of Nightfall collected in a trade. I came from small town, no comic shop in the area. I just knew I loved Batman. I had a stack of singles, but I hadn't come across your work yet. And then reading that collected trade and those covers in a good way, it terrified me. Of course, the 497, Batman 497 of Bane, so huge breaking it, but it was a few issues before that, 493 of Zaz coming behind Batman with the knife. And Batman is he's so big, but then also not sagging, but like his cape and everything was like maybe melted or so. But it was so striking to me of Zaz coming behind him. And I never heard of this character. I didn't know who he was. And then that issue also scared me, because I think it was illustrated by Norm Brayfogle. And it's like the issue lived up to the cover. So that was you talked earlier about like, how did people feel in discovering your work and stuff? And it's like, I can remember that was a standout to me of like, this is a scary story.
I always appreciate that, because I never saw myself. I'm too close to it. I'm just doing these things. But I would have what you just said. I've had numerous editors at DC tell me the same thing. When they were young and they were reading it, and that issue, those covers, that whole thing. So I do appreciate it. It wasn't like I didn't know they would be frightening. I thought they'd be frightening. I didn't know they were that different from everything else. I didn't think like that then. Because I'm always kind of in awe of other artists being able to do stuff. You always see what you can't do in other people. So I would just go, and I had no fear of being stereotyped. I'm this, I'm the guy who draws the scary. I had no fear of that. I would go further with it. So when I do hear that, I do appreciate that, because that's the point of a cover. And that's the goal you want as an artist, is to people would know it. I did a signing recently, and I'm still surprised how many people said as a kid, those stories or those covers freaked them out. Like they would stare, it would scare them. And I'm the same way. I'm not a guy who goes, I love all the scary stuff. I do love the scary stuff, but I watch horror films like this, like everybody else. and I go, oh, I don't need to see that. I'm one of those, but I'm attracted to it. I'm attracted to it. And it's like, okay, I'll take a look. So I kind of work, probably a psychiatrist would say, well, you're working it all out on paper. Maybe, I don't know. But when I'm doing it, I'm not thinking this will get them. I'm always thinking, or it gets to me. So I'm not good at saying, well, this is what they're going to like, or they're going to react this way. I do it where how I react to it, or my dreams on these paper, and then see, if other people react to it. You can't do this stuff. I don't think you can create anything in a grim mindset or a dark mindset. You have to be happy. It's gotta be nice. Everything's good. And then you can do it. Then you have the energy, and then you have all the cool stuff will come out.
You say that, that's almost, I mean, it's almost, if people didn't know Kelley Jones and hadn't heard him talk, I mean, just looking at your work, and I was like, oh, he must just be in all black, long black hair and scary and just walking around with candle lit. And it's like, no, he looks fun. He looks very happy. He's in he's got the lights on.
Look, I remember meeting, I was at a thing, and Frank Cho wanted to meet me. And he came up to me and he says, I don't, and we spoke for a few minutes, and he interrupted me because he was very kind. He was saying all the kind of stuff we're talking about, what I was doing. And he says, I don't mean to say this, I'm a little disappointed. He says, because you're not like, you just are like I'm wearing a cloak or something. He says, you're fairly well-adjusted, happy person. And I go, yeah,
sorry.
Because you can't, I can't work the other way. I can't, I mean, I'm certain people can do it, and good for them. But I think all the people I really like who do that kind of material were pretty happy people, Yeah. I think something David Lynch said something to that effect once, and it attracted me. He says, well, if you're tired or you're down or you're grim or you're moody or you're depressed, you can't create good stuff. You have to he always said, you have to eat right and you have to get enough sleep, and then you can create nightmares. And I went, that's true.
What a quote.
True. Yeah. And I'm like, well, if David says it, it's okay.
Yeah. I want to respect your time, so I just have a couple more questions.
Sure, go ahead.
Was there, I mean, we've just kind of talked about how much Batman stuff you've gotten to do. Do you have a standout? I mean, we can broaden it to, aside from Batman would be too easy, but whether it's a villain or even a character, one of his allies, that was when Doug would send a script, or even Scott Peterson would send a script, or, that you kind of lit up a little bit because you're like, oh, I get to draw this character.
I think when the first time was when Doug wrote the two-parter with the Scarecrow, I lit up that one. The other time was right around the same time, was I really wanted a shot at Mr. Freeze, and they said, you can't do Mr. Freeze, there's a moratorium, and they just didn't like Mr. Freeze there. Doug didn't have a problem with it, but they finally said if I didn't ask for anything for a year from them like this, they would give me one issue of it, right? So Doug wrote a single issue of Mr. Freeze, and that was another one that once I realized they were against it, I felt, okay, now I've got to show him that he can be a terrific villain, and he can be visually interesting and very different. And so I really enjoyed that. I loved, I did a couple issues with the Penguin, and and I didn't think, I'm not a guy who goes down the rogues gallery, because Doug invented some really terrific, there's a great one that I personally like, where I read it and it just lit me up. And he didn't tell me, he says, I'm going to write this pulpy thing. If you don't like it, we won't do it, but it's like a double-sized issue. It was this one called The Ogre and the Ape. And it was because he had been reading all these 30s and 40s pulps. And he says, why don't we just do a pulp, just one that's like a 30s and 40s thing. And that has a certain thing at that time of that really touched on some things for him that were important. And I dug that. I mean, I really, I thought, wow, this is so different. And I think that's some of my best drawing in there. He did another one with the Spectre that I thought, which again, another kind of a left field thing, but that one was a blast. The fact that you put the Joker and the Demon together, now you're gonna just, I sound like I'm saying every one of them, but as you're making me remember, I remember thinking, oh, this will be a blast to do. This will be a lot of fun. And they were. And again, I go back and I'll reread these, and there's times where everyone does this. It's like if you see an old picture of yourself, you go, oh,
Yeah.
or you something you did. But those, maybe because I was working with such really talented people, and certainly Doug, John, and Greg were there. And I'm not just complimenting to do it. I was genuinely in awe of what those guys did, because they had big careers before they came to. I was the kid on that thing. They had been around. They had really earned their chops, and so when I came along, I was just happy to be there. But when I look at these things now, they really stand up, and they're better than I remember. The stuff that I was embarrassed by or I would be ashamed of, I'm not so much anymore. I look at it, I go, man, that all came together. But Doug used to tell me that. He says, hey, if there's those things, I'll tell you that, because he was a rough in that. His criticisms were really rough, but they were true.
Yeah.
And you had to listen to him. And he didn't really ever do that. He would just say, what to him, did we hit the goals or achieve what we wanted to with it? But as far as the things that I would be concerned with, no, he was like, hey, these are fine. This is really good. And you got to remember too, we had in that period, I would say easily half the audience was like 12, 13 years old. It isn't like now where you're dealing with a far older audience.
Yeah.
There are a lot of kids. So we would get fabulous mail that would influence the story, saying, well, how does he do this? Or how does that happen? Or, what's in the belt? Or how does the batarang work? And where, how many different, one was, they had noticed, or thought, one kid had said something to the effect, well, he's really rich. Why would he only have one Batmobile? So I took that and said, he's right. He would have them all and stashed all over town. Why would he have to go all the way back to the Batcave and get, no, he owns half of, all these he'd hide them everywhere. So, but that was a good 12-year-old kid question.
Yeah.
That was great. And it opened doors,
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. That it kind of opened up some avenues of, hey, here's some extra bits to a story. Is there any character that maybe, and I mean, we can expand this too, that you didn't get to draw, or you wanted to draw more of and you didn't get to?
I always wanted to do Hugo Strange because he was a mad scientist.
Oh, that would be a great
Kelley Jones. And I always wanted a shot at it. Again, that was to be in the fourth year. I wanted the fourth year was going to be really terrific. And I don't mean that because we didn't do it, but it had all been kind of set up. When you see this little marionette guy, it was to lead to that fourth year. No matter what, I was probably 4 years, as I figured people want to break, move on to some new guy. But I always wanted to do Hugo Strange, and I loved Hugo Strange. Just like I said, he was a mad scientist who did all these incredible things. Make monsters and all that stuff. I would have been perfect in my way of thinking. So I wanted a shot at him. If that was the case, and if it was about doing more of a character, and also Razakul, I wanted to do something with Razakul.
He was in Kings of Fear a little bit, right?
A little bit, and now it's because I begged so I could just draw him at least once.
Yeah,
but I always wanted to do something with Roz. Doug was always careful with it because he says, "Hey, well, that's Denny's guy."
Yeah.
And I said, well, I'll ask Denny if it's okay to do a Roz story. And when I mentioned it to Denny, it was funny. He goes, well, yeah, I was kind of wondering why you weren't, he was flattered that I'd say, no, I love Roz. And I love, he rejuvenates himself. There's so much I can do with that, And so I was pretty, I missed that. And but other characters I wanted to do more of. I certainly want to do more with Mr. Freeze. That was one that I had more stuff I wanted to do, and I thought he would have been absolutely terrific. And I wanted a shot at the Riddler. I didn't see him as crazy. They kind of play him up as bizarre or whatever, and I didn't see him that way at all. I saw him as a pushed around guy who was getting even.
Mm-hmm.
And the riddles were to say how much smarter he was. And at that point, that would have been an interesting take. That would have been one of those things where I could go to town with that.
Hope springs eternal, right?
Yeah, well, maybe.
Maybe. And lastly, in this collection, did you get to write your biography in the back?
I don't,
because I want to know if this holds true. Jones continues to enjoy drawing comics because it remains one of the only jobs where you can listen to a ball game while you work and not get into trouble.
No, I didn't actually. That was something that I had said to one of the assistant editors one time.
Nice.
And he had called, and I was listening. I had a ball game on, and that's another thing where I probably disappointed people then, because I didn't come in a cape and cowl, and I would stop and say, "Do you know the score of something?" But yeah, I would. Well, I remember when I was a kid in school, it was the game would be, in those days, the playoff games would be in the afternoon, and you'd go crazy because you couldn't follow it, But no, they had heard me say that, and he just threw that in there, and that's kind of stuck through the years, because they all kind of like that. They all enjoyed that I would do that. I remember disappointing a lot of people. I did a signing with Neil Gaiman when we were doing Sandman, and I came with a San Francisco Giants cap on, and it was like, you don't do that at Sandman signing. They're all in different modes of alienation, and I'm sitting there going, with this ball cap on, and it just blew the whole thing. I told Neil I apologized and took the cap off.
That's funny. I could keep asking and talking to you all day, but I really appreciate you sitting down and talking to me. All things Batman. It's great. It's been a lot of fun. You've been, I think I can say your art stands out, and I would imagine, I'm not an artist, I can't even draw a good stick figure, but I would imagine as an artist, I hope it comes off as a compliment when your art, somebody can look at it, not know any context, and know that's Kelley Jones.
No, and art. Let me tell you, that's when I first started doing this, I had some very good editors. Ralph Macchio, who was Frank Miller's editor, and a lot of terrific editors I worked with, and they had said that the goal of any artist is, good or bad, they know it's you. And they told me how many guys that doesn't happen for, that they don't know who they are. They can be extremely talented, but they haven't defined themselves in a style. And to me, it wasn't so much finding a style as much as finding who I was and putting that on paper, what I liked and putting it on paper. And not just in the typical nerdy way, but the emotional way, like what's the atmosphere I want, and that has to carry through. And that started with Dead Man, where I just let that out. And so people would say, "Boy, you really changed." And I go, "No, I didn't really change. I just did not do." You can't get better. What you can do, though, and that's what I always tell people, there's no the getting good or better, whatever, that's all subjective. But letting that what's up in your head come out to paper, that can be embarrassing for people, and they don't want to do it because that's very revealing. And what if they reject it, and that's who you really are, and they say, "Oh, we really hate that." Well, I was okay with that, because I did it the other way, was doing very well, and I didn't care, and nobody knew who I was. When I started doing this, they immediately knew who I was. And that was, again, there's nothing better than being free when you do this, even in the constraints of really tight deadlines or really some brutal situations. But if you're free and you're doing your own thing, you look forward to it every day, and you don't feel like, when it's said and done, that the thing that matters, did it sell or not, or did it do? No, were you happy in doing it that day? Books tend to find audiences long after you're gone too. Long after you're out of there, someone will come along and go, I really like this, and it's 15 years after you did it. You know, they didn't know, or they changed their mind on something because they've got enough of a worldview or experience in comics to realize something different was here that was speaking with a certain sincerity, not to take your money, but to try to tell you a story, or say, hey kid, come here, look at this thing. And that's the only way I know how to do it. So no, I appreciate it when people say, I know who that is, you know, good or bad.
He's disappointing because he's not dressed in a, you know,
Yeah, that's it.
in a long hair and everything, but
no, because you know, you raise kids, you're married, you go out into life and stuff like that. That's where you recharge your batteries anyway, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then you come back to it and you say, okay, like for example, I really only draw in my studio. I don't take a sketch pad and draw out in the world or anything. In fact, I've been married forever, my wife of however long, and 30 some odd years, and it's like she's never seen me draw. Wow. Other than in my studio. And what I do is I try to just keep all that excitement and energy for the drawing board.
That's great.
And then when I go out, you're just thinking, and you know, it's not like I'm not artistic or anything, but that's where the ideas will pop into my head. But generally, and I'm creative outside of this, but it's not drawing. I'll do other things that are creative, but when I'm drawing, I like it to be in that one place to where I don't spend time in my studio other than when I'm working. And it's exciting that way still. It stays exciting. And
that's great.
And
that's a great idea.
I think it's
a great mindset. Yeah.
Well, you just, you know, it isn't like I started doing that. It's what I discovered. And then I remember thinking, this is working for me, you know, and it makes its own environment. And even friends, and like I said, friends, my wife, whatever, they go, it does feel different in that room than the rest of the house or wherever it is. It just feels different. But then it doesn't hurt that I still have all the stuff I collected when I was 10 years old.
Sure.
And, you know, I still have all my posters and all my, you know, all my old comics and stuff that I love. And it has that real certain energy that you can't get fake. It has to be real. You know, it's all these odds and ends. It's the flotsam and jetsam of my life is still in that room from when I was this little kid up till now.
That's great. Is there anything you want to plug away? Anything that's coming up for you? Your Twitter?
I do have a short story coming out for DC. That's a Batman Dead Man story.
Yes.
And I do have a couple of short things like that coming up. But and then there's the thing, obviously, don't want me to talk about, but there is a project I'm doing with Matt Wagner.
Awesome.
Fairly involved and large, and that's what I'm spending a lot of time on. And that they'll tell me when I can talk about it, but that'll be fairly soon.
Okay. And then do you know what is it just at Kelley Jones on Twitter, which I highly recommend. As a fan, I love the art that you're posting.
Thank you. Well, like I said,
please keep doing it.
I will. I just do it as a fun thing. Well, they asked me to do it, right? Because they said, you need to do this. And they took Matt and I's arms and put them behind our backs and said, you have to do this. So I said, okay. And I looked at it for a bit. And, you know, you hear all the horror stories of Twitter and all those things. And I figured, well, I'm just going to, you know what? I'm just going to put out art and have it be a fun thing to do. Just look at art and see it in its raw state and not really push or sell or anything. Just show art and just let people enjoy seeing stuff like that. Because it's interesting to me, you know, to see the coffee stains on it, all the erasing and all the mistakes. And so I do appreciate that. And I'm glad it, you know, like I said, I've only been doing it about 6 weeks or so, maybe 2 months, not that long, but it's been, as long as I keep doing it like that, it seems to be a lot of fun.
Great. Well, on this end, it seems rewarding for us. It's pretty fun.
Thank you.
Again, I thank you, sir, for sitting down and talking to me. This has been a very great conversation that I couldn't have expected to have gotten the opportunity. So much appreciated.
I appreciate it. I'm pretty easygoing on that. So
yeah.
No, but again, I've said it before. I still think of myself more as a fan who gets published than some professional speaking. I'm a fan. Like, well, when you started, you get me going on Englehart Rogers, and I will go, and not from some lofty position, but as, yeah, do you see this? It's really great. I mean, I there's always something to learn, and that I still, I could, you get me alone with Steve Englehart, and I'll drive him nuts. But I did that with I worked with Len Wein on some Swamp Things, and I used to just say, you get all the business crap out of the way, and then I'd fanboy on him like crazy, and it was fun. I did it to John Byrne once. So I sat next to him, and I didn't care what he was going to react. I had my moment. I'm going to fanboy on him. And he was totally pleasant about it.
You had your Batman 493 cover moment with him.
Yes, I did. I went on and on about all this stuff. Yeah. And you find people are very gracious about it. I think they're surprised, to be honest. But like I said, I never took any formal art training. I never did anything. I never thought I would be doing this, much less a career in it for all these years. I mean, I've been doing it professionally since October 31st, if that isn't that odd. October 31st, 1982. And I was like a kid. I was just a kid. They pulled me out of a hat and said, let's do it. I thought it would only last a year or two at best, because I was going to school, and I figured, but it has lasted all these years. So I haven't had that moment where you get the diploma, or you moved on, or whatever. It was like I was a kid then, and it stayed that way. And when I met Bernie Wrightson, I was very, I was doing this, but I didn't let him know. I chucked my badge and went up and stood in line and geeked like everybody else. And I did, because he was owed that to me. I wanted that. I wanted that. I didn't want to do it the other way. So I like doing that with these guys. When I meet them, I'm like anyone else. It's like I'm tongue tied, and I gotta take a breath, and just tell them how much I love what they did, or what it meant to me. That it still matters to me, that it actually means more to me now than it did then. And that's amazing. But that's the fun of this. And how many things happen in your life, and this is why comics are different, is that love you have of it as a kid stays with you through your whole life. And you're right there again. You can stay in touch with that energy, and not feel goofy about it. It's just, it's a purity that a lot of people lose. They always say you can't go home again. Well, you can if you collect comics, because you're still that person who can remember when you bought that thing off the stands, and when you read it, what it meant to you. And nothing else really has that. There's just this joy in it. And that's the thing I always wanted to, I don't see myself as anything more than a fan who got really lucky, who could sit next to really important people who did this and drive them nuts, or because I used to do it to Len Wein pretty good. I did it to Doug Minchin tolerably. We got to talk about work. I remember I said, yeah, we will, but you did this thing in Shang-Chi, and I got to know blah, 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 blah. And then he'd get talking about it, and we'd lose an hour. Same with Len. I would just drive him crazy with stuff about what he did. And he would go, okay. And I would, but that was the fun of it. And it was, I'm not, I wasn't asking for any other reason than for my own personal enjoyment, And there is something to that when you sit there and you think, God, now it's like I'm 12, but with all the all the responsibilities of an adult, but I still have this thing where I feel sorry for my friends in the regular world. They have none of the stuff they were when they were a kid, right? They have none of those things. All of us, we drag it around like poor Marley and his chain. It's like everywhere we go, we have all this stuff, and it's just wonderful. That kind of passion, it's got its good and its bad, but mostly it's good.
Mostly good. Always good.
Yeah.
Always good. Well, I appreciate you taking the time yet again. I'll keep
telling
you that
I liked
it a lot. It was great talking to you and hearing your insight on
all right.
all of
Thank
your
you very
work.
much, sir.
Lawrence.